The billionaire CEO had his secret revealed on a private jet and was shocked to find out they were twins. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Michelle had never imagined she would find herself standing beside a sleek private jet in a secluded hangar, especially not on a balmy evening when the city lights behind her hinted at a life so far removed from her own. Dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, she clutched her small purse and tried to steady her breathing. A swift gust of wind, carrying the faint scent of fuel and night air, tugged at her hair as she contemplated the enormity of what she was about to do. Inside the hangar, the aircraft gleamed under overhead lights that glared almost too brightly. At the open hatch, a sharply dressed flight attendant greeted her with a courteous nod. "Welcome, Ms. Grant," the attendant said, extending a hand to help her up the short staircase. Michelle forced a polite smile, stepping onto the plush carpet that led into a world of polished extravagance. The jet's interior was a testament to Edward Anderson's taste. Cream leather seats, sleek gold trim, and tasteful artwork adorning the walls. Soft music played through hidden speakers, blending with the low hum of people chatting. Waiters glided through the narrow aisle, offering glasses of champagne on silver trays. Michelle held up a hand to decline as she moved further in, seeking a moment of calm before plunging into the thick of it. Her heartbeat drummed louder with every step. There was so much on her mind. She thought of her twins, waiting back home, blissfully unaware of the storm that might soon sweep them into its midst. Every thought of them, of their sweet laughter and big, curious eyes, sent a bolt of determination through her. Tonight, she was here for a reason. She forced herself to look up, and that was when her eyes caught sight of Edward Anderson for the first time in years. He stood by the bar with a group of men dressed in impeccable suits, exuding the effortless confidence of someone well acquainted with power. His smile seemed genuine as he spoke, and every so often his gaze flicked over the cabin, ensuring all his guests felt included. His presence glowed. He was the host, the showman, the center of attention. Michelle's stomach clenched involuntarily. A flicker of recognition passed across his face the second he spotted her. But then someone tapped his shoulder, redirecting his focus to a contract that needed signing. She breathed out slowly, relief and anticipation mixing into one confusing swirl of emotion. It gave her the space to slip away toward a window seat on the far side of the aircraft, an area not quite as crowded. She had barely settled into the plush seat when a familiar figure approached, a friend who had quietly accompanied her to the event. He was the one person in this opulent world who truly knew the weight of her secrets. Leaning over, he whispered words of encouragement. "You've come this far. It's time he knows." Michelle gave a small nod. Yes, tonight was about closure and truth. But how would Edward handle hearing that she had raised twin children, his children, alone these last few years with no support or acknowledgement? She inhaled, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. From across the cabin, Edward let out an easy laugh at a quip from a board member. She recognized the smooth edge to his demeanor, a veneer of charm he used at these high-stakes parties. When the flight attendant announced the official start of the festivities, guests clinked their champagne flutes in refined salutes. The hum of conversation grew. Michelle felt a wave of nerves and decided to find somewhere quieter for a moment. She drifted down a narrow corridor that led to a more private nook, away from the bright lighting and swirling chatter. The muted hum of the jet's engines accompanied her as she stared at her reflection in a window, noting how anxious her eyes looked in the dim light. She heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she spotted Edward, who had apparently broken from his group to follow her. His voice was low and measured as he spoke. "Is everything all right? You seemed uneasy." His politeness tugged on old memories, recalling how he once made her feel special when they first met. Michelle's throat went dry. She had promised herself she would come straight out with the truth. Yet now that he stood so close, his gaze on hers, words faltered. "Yes, I'm fine," she managed, voice quieter than she intended. Thank you for the invitation tonight." His brow furrowed slightly. "Invitation?" he echoed, sounding puzzled. Before he could inquire further, a tall man in a tailored suit tapped Edward's shoulder, politely insisting that Edward finalize some urgent business documents before they lost wireless connectivity. Edward offered Michelle an apologetic glance. "Don't go anywhere," he said, then turned to the man with a resigned nod. She watched him walk away, conversation overshadowed by the snap of negotiations and the scratch of pens on contracts. Left alone, Michelle leaned against the wooden paneling of the corridor, letting the low hum from the engines fill her ears. She had to do it. There was no turning back. If she walked away now, she'd only be delaying the inevitable. She thought of her children again, their laughter echoing in her mind, and resolved to see this through. Straightening, she slipped a hand into her purse and glanced at the photos she always kept. Two bright, smiling faces stared back, each sporting a mischievous twinkle that mirrored their father's. It was time he took responsibility. With renewed determination, she made her way back to the main cabin. Guests were scattered in small clusters, discussing business ventures, upcoming charity galas, and yacht parties in hushed, polished tones. Chandeliers glistened overhead as if even the lighting itself had an air of refined confidence. Edward's voice drifted from somewhere behind her. Yes, we'll finalize the details once we land," he was saying to a white-haired gentleman who nodded vigorously. Edward handed the gentleman a folder, then excused himself and started looking around, presumably for Michelle. They locked eyes across the cabin once more. His expression hinted at relief, as though he'd been worried she might have vanished. Threading his way between clusters of high-profile guests, he approached her. "Sorry about that," he began, looking genuinely contrite. "I don't usually handle these signings mid-flight, but time-sensitive deals often demand attention at the most inconvenient moments." Despite his light tone, Michelle could sense the swirl of tension beneath it all. This time, she did not back away. Gathering every ounce of courage, she stepped closer, close enough to notice how his expression softened with curiosity. She could hear her pulse thumping in her ears, taste the dryness of her mouth. "Edward," she began, voice tinged with a tremor she couldn't quite hide. "I know you're busy, but we need to talk." His gaze flicked momentarily to her trembling hand, then back up to her eyes. "Is something wrong?" he asked quietly. Worry crept into his tone. Michelle inhaled, preparing to speak the words that could forever change both their lives. The hum of the jet engines droned on. Behind them, well-dressed investors chattered about share prices and expansions in foreign markets, oblivious to the personal storm about to erupt. A swirl of old emotions, resentment, nostalgia, hope, tangled inside her. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, heart hammering, and forced herself to hold his gaze. When she spoke, her voice came out low, carefully measured, yet it shook with years of pent-up longing and frustration. "Edward, there's something about us you need to know. Something about your children." A hush fell between them when Michelle finally spoke those words. Edward's confident smile faded, replaced by startled confusion. The weight of her revelation seemed to suck the air from the luxurious jet cabin, leaving only the buzzing of whispered conversations and the faint hum of the aircraft's engines. He stared at her, trying to make sense of what she'd just said. "My children?" he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. Michelle nodded, swallowing hard. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she refused to step back. For so long, she'd imagined this moment. The looks, the questions, the wave of disbelief. She tried to gather her thoughts in the face of Edward's gaze, which flickered between astonishment and something harsher she couldn't quite place. Behind them, the soiree continued. Guests clinked glasses and exchanged pleasantries, unaware that in one tense corner of the jet, Edward Anderson's entire reality was shifting. Michelle glanced over his shoulder, spotting a few curious eyes glancing their way. Perhaps people sensed the sudden chill in the air, or noticed Edward's usually poised demeanor slip. Whatever the case, more than one set of eyes lingered. "Michelle, please explain," he said, reaching for her elbow in a gentle but firm gesture. The corridor felt too exposed, so they stepped behind a velvet curtain draped in front of a small, unoccupied lounge area. One of the flight attendants started to speak, then hesitated and retreated, leaving them alone. Michelle sighed. "I know it sounds impossible. I thought so too at first." She paused, studying his face. "But after that night we spent together, I tried to get a hold of you. I didn't hear back. I sent emails, letters to your offices, even tried to call. Every attempt went nowhere." She took a breath, willing her voice not to crack. "The truth is, Edward, I was pregnant, with twins." For a moment he looked as though he might protest, but the seriousness in her eyes seemed to sap his strength for denial. He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to think clearly. "I never saw any letters. Nobody told me anything." His jaw tightened. I would have done something." She believed he was telling the truth in that moment, but it did little to erase the years she spent alone. "I've heard that before," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I tried to make peace with the fact you weren't part of their lives. But they deserve to know who their father is, and you deserve to know them, if that's something you want." From the main cabin, a crisp voice called Edward's name. One of his board members, perhaps. Michelle noticed a tall man in a pristine suit glancing around, clearly looking for Edward with some urgency. She could also see Edward's personal guard shift in their direction, uncertain but ready to intervene if needed. "Edward?" the board member repeated. The man stepped closer, concern etched on his brow. "We need your signature on some final documents before we lose the connection again. The entire deal hinges on these last-minute negotiations." "Sir, is everything all right?" Edward instinctively put a hand up, a silent plea for a moment more. "Give me a minute," he said, voice strained. The man hesitated but nodded, stepping a polite distance away. The guard also remained nearby, though his posture softened at Edward's unspoken signal. Michelle felt waves of conflicting emotions rolling off Edward. Confusion, resentment that she hadn't managed to reach him, guilt that he'd been absent without knowing, and a distant flicker of something else, maybe anger at those around him who might have concealed her letters. Outside their small haven, the cabin lights seemed too bright, and a sudden jolt of turbulence rattled glasses on the bar, drawing gasps from a few guests. Edward braced himself against the wall. "Tell me everything," he said. "All of it." She explained how, not long after they parted ways, she discovered she was pregnant. She recounted how quickly fear set in once her attempts to contact him failed. Fear for the future, fear of judging eyes, fear of raising 2 babies alone. And yet she'd done it, day by day, forging a life for herself and 2 little girls who meant the world to her. Edward let out a shaky exhale, as if a dam was about to burst in his mind. "Why now?" he asked, voice subdued. "Why did you decide to come tonight of all nights?" "Because I was tired of hiding," she answered, meeting his gaze. "And because the twins keep asking about you. They deserve answers, no matter what your reaction might be." The curtain parted slightly as the flight attendant peeked in. Sensing tension, she offered Michelle a gentle, sympathetic smile and held out a bottle of water. Michelle accepted gratefully, sipping to steady her throat, then nodding a silent thanks. Edward's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Another investor calling, no doubt. The tension in him mounted. "I have to finalize these documents," he muttered, sounding almost apologetic. "I can't just abandon this deal. It's too important." Michelle stepped aside, granting him space. "I understand. It's your life, she murmured, although her words carried an edge of bitterness. I don't want to ruin your business. I only came because I thought you should know the truth. After tonight, if you decide you want no part of them, She swallowed, feeling tears welling behind her eyes. I'll accept that. He began to respond, but a pressing voice interrupted yet again. This time, the same board member from before all but insisted Edward step out to sign the necessary contracts. Michelle could see the man's gaze flick anxiously between her and Edward, his concern more about Edward's reliability in front of high-stakes investors than any personal empathy. Edward hesitated. I'll be right back, he told Michelle, his tone gentler than before. Don't leave. She nodded and slipped out past him, returning to the main cabin. The party atmosphere persisted, suits milling about, an occasional burst of laughter, glasses clinking on trays. But Michelle sensed the change in the air. People were whispering, side-eyeing her discreetly. Word was getting around that something had shaken Edward to his core. She stood near a window and pretended to admire the view, doing her best to ignore the curious stares. One or two individuals stepped nearer, drawn like moths to the flames of gossip, but she offered curt answers and politely turned away. Her entire body felt wired, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She needed Edward to come back, to talk more, to truly grasp that he was a father. The notion that he might just sign his contracts, turn his back, and pretend none of this existed left an ache in her chest. After a few long minutes, she saw Edward re-emerge, neatly dressed as always, but with a haunted look in his eyes. He clutched a small stack of papers, likely the contracts everyone had been clamoring about. His tie was slightly askew, as though he'd tugged at it in frustration. Scanning the cabin, he located her, and their gazes locked. He approached, ignoring various people who attempted to catch his attention on the way. His expression was unreadable. She saw his jaw tighten, the knuckles of his hand whitening around the documents. This was the moment, she realized, when he'd decide whether to deal with this unimaginable news head-on or push it aside in favor of business. He stopped in front of her, voice subdued but intense. Michelle, I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. The slightest tremor rippled through his words. He glanced over his shoulder, ensuring no one stood too close. We're not done talking. Don't move from this spot. His voice shook, leaving Michelle both nervous and hopeful. Michelle remained by the window, fidgeting with her fingertips as a slow, uncertain buzz rippled through the cabin. Conversations that had once been urbane and poised now carried an undercurrent of speculation. She could feel the curious glances, hear the low murmurs whenever she shifted her weight. Every second that ticked by seemed to ramp up the tension. Her mind was a whirlwind of worry, replaying Edward's words. Don't move, over and over again. When Edward reappeared, he wore a resolute expression. Striding through the narrow aisle with purpose, he cast quick glances around as if assessing who might be eavesdropping. His shoulders seemed strained beneath the perfect cut of his suit. Stopping in front of her, he lowered his voice. I'm sorry it took so long. We need to manage this carefully, he said, voice tight. We'll talk in a moment. Just stay close. She nodded, uncertain, while he moved off to speak with his personal PR manager, a hawk-eyed woman in a tailored blazer who'd just boarded the plane. Their exchange was hushed, yet animated, punctuated by emphatic gestures and anxious headshakes. Michelle guessed they were discussing how to contain any gossip that might jeopardize the deals Edward was finalizing. The hush among the guests thickened. Nearly everyone was trying in subtle ways to catch snatches of the drama. She was about to step closer and offer her side when an elegantly dressed couple walked by, shooting her a vaguely polite but unmistakably curious smile. Michelle took a controlled breath and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She reminded herself why she was here, not to create scandal or burn Edward's business empire, but to set the record straight about his children. Yet she could already feel how the rumor, Edward Anderson has secret twins, was igniting in the crowd. An older gentleman with sharp eyes positioned himself nearby, seemingly immersed in conversation with another guest. But Michelle noticed how frequently he glanced at her. She recognized him as one of Edward's key investors from a promotional flyer she'd seen earlier in the evening. His speculation was obvious. Even from a distance, Michelle felt cornered by his stare. Across the cabin, a waiter tapped a spoon against a champagne flute, prompting everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the waiter announced, "a toast to Mr. Edward Anderson's new venture." The entire cabin hummed with forced enthusiasm, glasses rising while a ripple of polite applause spread through the group. Edward, compelled by social duty, raised his own flute, though his eyes never quite left Michelle's. As the toast finished, Michelle's mind churned. Why had she chosen this night to corner him with her revelation? Of all possible moments, she'd chosen one fraught with high-stakes negotiations, gilded board members, and clinking champagne. She stood amidst it all, feeling out of place and simultaneously resolute. The crowd parted suddenly to admit a tall woman in a sapphire blue gown that flattered her sharp features. Her posture screamed importance. From the way Edward's jaw set, Michelle guessed she was related to him, possibly a cousin or sister, the same distinctive cheekbones, the same commanding confidence. The woman inclined her head in greeting, scanning Michelle with cool, assessing eyes before turning toward Edward. Her words were only partially audible over the cabin's hum. "Edward, darling," she said, voice crisp. "You didn't tell me you were hosting such an interesting party. Busy night for you?" Her gaze flicked toward Michelle. Edward cleared his throat, setting down his glass. "Michelle," he began, gently guiding her forward. "This is my family?" the woman interjected, offering Michelle a quick, polite handshake. "I've been part of Edward's life a long time. And you?" Michelle mustered a neutral smile. "I'm an acquaintance." The woman's brow arched ever so slightly, but she returned a measured smile. "Pleasure, I'm sure." Then she looped an arm through Edward's, leaning in to speak low, though Michelle overheard fragments about rumors and bad timing. Edward whispered something back, casting sidelong looks at Michelle. Moments later, the relative released his arm and disappeared into the swirling crowd of guests, but her regal posture suggested she would be back. Before Michelle could exhale, she felt a presence at her side. The same tall relative had circled back, slipping between her and the rest of the crowd, effectively backing Michelle up against a silver-plated side table. Her expression remained civil, but her tone chilled. "I'm sure you understand what this, whatever it is, could do to Edward's reputation," she said, tapping manicured fingers on the table's edge. "Is that really what you intend?" Michelle bristled at the insinuation. "I didn't come here to harm him or his business. If anything, I came so we could finally address the truth. He deserves to know." The woman let out a delicate scoff. "Truth, is it? I hope you recognize how these claims could be twisted." She leveled Michelle with a stare that cut through the air. "I trust we'll see more of you, in a suitable context." Then, with a pointed half-smile, she drifted away, joining a trio of influential investors near the lounge chairs. Heart-pounding, Michelle felt her resolve firm up. She refused to be intimidated or shamed into silence. The twins were innocent in all this, and no amount of social or corporate pressure would keep her from standing up for them. Stunned at the nerve of Edward's family member, Michelle folded her arms across her stomach and tried to steady her breathing. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She fished it out, only to see a message from the friend who'd helped arrange her invitation tonight. "Are you okay? Heard there's drama brewing. Let me know if you need backup." She typed a quick reply, her fingers trembling. "I'll be fine. Just keep an eye on things for me." After a moment, she noticed Edward slipping behind a glass partition near the bar, phone pressed to his ear. He looked harried, pacing back and forth, occasionally running a hand through his hair. The call ended, and he rejoined her, loosening his tie. "That was my lawyer. he muttered, glancing around. Let's just say people are already talking. I've got to get ahead of this situation. A soft voice from behind caused them both to turn. The same flight attendant who had offered Michelle water earlier approached. Her eyes were kind, though tinted with concern. Ms. Grant, can I bring you anything? You look like you've had quite a night. Michelle managed a faint, appreciative smile. I'm okay. Thank you. You're very kind. The attendant stepped away, but not before gently squeezing Michelle's hand. It was a tiny gesture of support that, for a moment, buoyed her spirits in the face of so many hard stares. Turning back, Michelle found herself face to face with the investor who'd been watching her from across the cabin earlier. He looked stern now, crossing his arms in a way that made him loom taller. Mr. Anderson, he said, inclining his head first toward Edward, there's a rumor spreading that you have children no one knew about. Shall I assume these are merely baseless allegations? Edward's entire frame went tense. He stepped forward, shoulders squared. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said with forced composure. We'll discuss anything relevant at the proper time, with the proper context. The investor's eyes didn't leave Michelle's face. I would hope so. If your personal matters compromise my investments, I'll need assurances. Michelle's heart hammered. Edward flicked her a look that carried an unspoken apology. I promise, everything will be handled, he told the man. Now, if you'll excuse us. Once the investor drifted off, Edward let out a low sigh that seemed to deflate him. This isn't going away, he said, voice taut. He thumbed through several screens on his phone, likely checking urgent messages. We're in mid-flight, and yet it feels like the world outside is already clamoring for headlines. Michelle swallowed. I never meant to jeopardize your livelihood, but I couldn't wait anymore. Sometimes the truth needs to come out. His eyes softened briefly. I understand, he said, though he still looked torn. But it's not just me at stake here. There's an entire company relying on investor confidence. And my family? He paused, as if weighing the right phrase. They're complicated. She gave him a searching look. What about our family? She asked quietly. The twins are part of this too. He nodded slowly. Before he could say more, a loud chime echoed through the cabin, signaling the pilot's announcement. Edward glanced out a window, noting the lights far below. He inhaled, looking at the contract still clutched in his hand. We need to land soon, and once we do, everything changes, whether you're ready or not. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and the captain's calm voice announced their imminent descent. The party atmosphere within the jet seemed to fizzle under the pressure of the landing procedure. Edward set his jaw, glanced anxiously at Michelle, and motioned for everyone to strap in. People began stowing away champagne flutes and gathering papers, all the while stealing glances at the tension between their host and the woman who had been at his side for much of the flight. Michelle's heart thumped in her chest. The city lights outside the window glowed like rivers of gold, growing larger as the jet descended. She felt a knot in her stomach, unsure of what waited once they touched the ground. Edward, seated across the aisle, seemed preoccupied. Occasionally, he flicked his gaze her way but remained silent, too troubled or too furious to speak. Moments later, the wheels touched down with a low rumble. The cabin lights brightened, revealing tired or anxious faces. Some guests exchanged polite farewells or reached for their phones, eager to check messages and return to normal life. Michelle watched them, her mind spinning. She couldn't help but think this was only the start of a fallout that could turn her life upside down. A glossy black SUV waited outside the jet, its headlights cutting through the shadows of the private hangar. Disembarking the aircraft felt surreal, stepping from the cocoon of luxury into the humid night air where a small crowd had gathered. A flash from behind a fence alerted Michelle to the presence of at least one photographer lurking in the distance. Whether by chance or someone's tip-off, prying eyes had shown up to snag evidence of Edward Anderson's every move. Stay close, Edward said softly, leaning toward Michelle as they descended the air stairs. He straightened his suit jacket, trying to regain composure, then gestured for her to follow him swiftly across the tarmac. She managed a nod, her heart still pounding. A swirl of movement caught her eye. As she neared the SUV, she caught sight of Edward's relative from earlier, the tall, regal woman in the sapphire gown, who appeared more than a little displeased. She was flanked by two other family members, both wearing expressions that ranged from cold suspicion to outright irritation. "There you are," the woman called, her tone stiff. "I need a word, Edward." She allowed her gaze to flick over Michelle briefly. "Alone." He paused, glancing between Michelle and the woman. "Give me a minute, all right?" he murmured to Michelle, who stood awkwardly near the open door of the SUV. Michelle folded her arms, watching as Edward followed his relative a short distance away. The conversation looked heated. The relative gesticulated sharply, pointing once toward Michelle. Edward's expression darkened in response. The body language alone told her that the tension had only escalated after landing. Before she could decide whether to approach, the woman spun around and advanced on Michelle, eyes narrowed. "We've had just about enough surprises for one night," she snapped. "I don't know what your angle is, but this is not the time or place for whatever you're trying to pull." Michelle felt her cheeks flare with anger. "My angle is making sure Edward hears the truth. That's all I've ever wanted." The woman's mouth twitched with disdain. "Is that so?" Her voice lowered. "You're jeopardizing a lot more than some fleeting romance by stirring up this scandal. I suggest you think carefully about the damage you could cause." Michelle's temper flared. Enough was enough. She squared her shoulders, meeting the older woman's glare. "The damage was done years ago when Edward disappeared from my life. I'm not trying to cause a scene, but I'm not walking away until this is resolved." Her voice trembled with pent-up frustration. "I have twins to worry about. It's their future on the line." A sudden shuffle of steps came from behind them. One of Edward's bodyguards, clearly sensing the hostility, positioned himself near Michelle as if to protect her from the relative's verbal barbs. He didn't speak, just offered a solid presence that made it clear he was on hand if things got out of control. Across the hangar, Edward ended his conversation with another associate and approached, the tension visible in the lines around his eyes. "Please," he said to his family member, voice taut. "Enough. We'll handle this discreetly. Let me speak with Michelle in private." His relative looked ready to protest, but thought better of it. Instead, she shot Michelle a final, withering glare and strode away, the click of her heels echoing against concrete. The bodyguard stepped aside, letting Edward move in closer. Edward took a breath, then met Michelle's eyes. "Follow me," he said, the edge in his voice blunted by fatigue. He led her through a side door into the hangar's administrative lounge, a quieter space with a single desk, a few chairs, and a table stacked with paperwork. Two large windows overlooked the runway. Most of the party guests remained outside, busy sorting out their transport, but more than a few tried to peer inside, eager for any sign of Edward's next move. The moment they were alone, Michelle's frustration boiled over. "Why did you vanish without a word?" she demanded, voice still low but crackling with emotion. "I reached out to you every way I could. You never responded. Then you left me to raise twins by myself. Do you realize how unfair that was?" Edward set a hand on the desk to steady himself. He looked equally pained and confused. "I told you. I had no idea you were trying to contact me," he insisted. "I never received any letters. If I had—" His voice caught. "I'm sorry. Really, I am. But we can't change that now. We have to figure out what to do going forward." She pulled out her phone, navigating to a hidden album of photos. Thumbs trembling, she flipped through snapshots of her girls over the years. Birthdays, school plays, quiet mornings in the park. Each image told a story of the life Edward had missed. Without a word, she held the phone out to him. He carefully took it. The shifting expressions on his face, shock, remorse, sadness, revealed how deeply he was affected. He lingered on a photo of both girls with matching pigtails, grinning at the camera, their eyes holding that familiar spark. "How old are they now?" he asked thickly, unable to look away from the screen. "5, Michelle answered. "They'll be 6 soon. They've been asking about their dad for ages." Edward's fingers tightened around the phone. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice raw. How could all my people have kept this from me?" Before Michelle could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. One of Edward's business associates, someone from the jet, poked his head in. "Edward, we need you to sign these documents," he said, looking visibly agitated. "A few of the investors are already uneasy about tonight's developments." Edward closed his eyes briefly, then handed the phone back to Michelle. "Give me a moment," he muttered, addressing the associate. "I'll be right there." The associate left, leaving the door slightly ajar. From outside, Michelle glimpsed the swirl of suits and cocktail dresses, the tense chatter seeping in. She felt a pang of guilt. She truly hadn't wanted to derail Edward's business, but at the same time, her children needed recognition and security. Keeping them hidden in the shadows for Edward's reputation wasn't an option anymore. She sensed movement behind her. Edward was staring at the photograph still displayed on her phone, his own reflection caught in the screen. It was as though he couldn't tear his eyes away from that image of 2 bright-eyed girls. For the first time that night, Michelle caught a glimpse of genuine regret in his expression. "I want to make this right," he said hoarsely. "I need to meet them and fix this. But first, we have a bigger storm coming." Sunlight crept through the blinds of the upscale hotel suite, painting thin stripes across the plush carpet. Michelle barely slept the night before. Her mind had replayed every tense moment from the jet to the hangar lounge, then back to the hurried conversations with Edward. Now, in the fresh light of morning, she felt strangely exposed. She could almost sense the weight of the city pressing in around her, as if everyone knew her secret. The hotel room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. A phone sat on the edge of the side table, buzzing periodically with messages that Michelle was afraid to read. She glanced at the black screen, dread gathering in her stomach. No more hiding, she reminded herself, drawing a shaky breath. There was no going back now. She finally mustered the courage to pick up the phone. Text after text revealed a flood of alerts and missed calls. Some from friends, a few from unknown numbers, and one from a neighbor who'd asked, in a concerned tone, whether the swirling rumors on the morning news were true. Michelle's heart fluttered. She hadn't turned on the TV yet, but she could guess what the networks were saying. The reclusive billionaire CEO Edward Anderson apparently had not 1, but 2 secret children. No matter how carefully Edward's PR team tried to manage the story, this was the kind of revelation tabloids salivated over. Michelle tapped open a news app, and her worst fears were confirmed. A headline glared back at her. "Mysterious mother emerges. Edward Anderson's hidden heirs?" She dropped the phone onto the bed, her throat tight. She feared how this might affect her daughters, who were at home with a trusted friend. She pictured their innocent smiles and felt tears prick her eyes. Pushing the emotions aside, she decided it was time to prepare for what came next. A light knock on the door startled her. "Ms. Grant?" called a polite voice. "It's Edward's publicist. May I come in?" Michelle hesitated, glancing around the suite to ensure nothing personal was scattered about. She opened the door to find a tall woman dressed in a sharp skirt suit, her expression professional but tense. "We need to speak if you don't mind," the woman said quietly. Michelle nodded, stepping aside to allow the publicist in. The woman's gaze swept the room, then settled on Michelle. "I understand this must be overwhelming," she began, "but Edward would like you to stay here for the time being, at least until we can contain the situation." Michelle swallowed. "Contain? That sounds like I'm some problem to be locked away." The publicist shook her head. "It's just that the media will be relentless. Paparazzi are already gathering near the lobby, and some have gone poking around your neighborhood trying to find the twins." Her expression turned sympathetic. "Edward wants to make sure you and the girls remain unharmed in this frenzy." Michelle felt a chill. "They know where the twins live?" "We don't have confirmation yet," the publicist admitted, "but we've arranged a private security detail to keep watch in case anything escalates." She offered a reassuring look. "And Edward is holding an emergency conference call right now to address the investors, so they don't panic at these revelations." Michelle nodded, half in a daze. She could hardly believe how quickly her life had turned public. The thought of strangers hounding her children struck fear into her heart, but she clung to the hope that Edward was sincere in his promise to help protect them. "Thanks," she mumbled, forcing a polite smile. I'll stay for now." The publicist handed her a business card with a direct phone line. "If you need anything, call. We'll try to make arrangements to get you a more private location soon." Then, with a final apologetic glance, she left. Alone again, Michelle realized she couldn't just sit here, paralyzed. She grabbed her phone and dialed the friend who was watching the twins. Hearing their giggles in the background brought a tightness to her chest, a reminder of why she'd done this in the first place. She carefully explained that there might be photographers lurking around. Her friend promised to keep the curtains drawn and phones on silent. Michelle thanked her, promising she'd figure out a plan soon. An hour later, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Edward's name on the screen. She answered in a heartbeat, her nerves taut. "Edward?" His voice came through, weary but collected. "Michelle, I've just left an emergency meeting with my top shareholders. They want answers, and the press is running wild. Are you doing okay?" She took a moment before responding. "As okay as I can be, given the circumstances. A publicist came by, said I should stay here." He cleared his throat. "Yes, that's best for now. I want to see you, talk in person. We need to coordinate our next steps." "People are calling me non-stop," she said, her voice nearly cracking. "It's one thing to talk about me, but I can't stand the idea of them hounding the girls." "That's why we have to make a statement," Edward replied, his tone firmer. "And we have to do it together. Let's meet for dinner tonight in a private location. Bring any documentation you have on the twins, so we can address any doubts about their well-being. But keep it discreet. I don't want more eyes on us than necessary." Michelle hesitated, then finally breathed out, "All right." That evening, as dusk fell, a discreet black town car pulled up outside the hotel's side entrance. The driver, a stone-faced professional, guided Michelle inside the vehicle without a word. They wove through back roads to avoid the paparazzi, eventually pulling into a quiet underground parking garage beneath an upscale restaurant. Michelle's pulse hammered. This cloak-and-dagger routine felt surreal, but she clung to the hope that it would somehow offer clarity. Edward was waiting in a private dining room, seated at a small table set for two. Dim, warm light revealed the tension in his posture. He wore a suit again, but the tie was loosened, the top button undone. When Michelle entered, he rose, offering a ghost of a smile. In another life, it might have been a romantic setting. A table tucked away, soft music playing, a single candle flickering. But tonight, all Michelle felt was the weight of scandal bearing down on them both. She took the seat opposite him, slipping her phone and a small folder of documents onto the table. They exchanged awkward greetings. The waiter appeared with water and offered a menu, but both declined any actual meal. Neither had much appetite for fine dining tonight. Edward leaned forward, voice low. "The media picked up a rumor of secret heirs, but so far nothing's fully confirmed. People are spinning the story in all sorts of directions. Some are even calling it a hoax. My investors are spooked, worried a scandal might sink our stock prices." Michelle clasped her hands together, feeling the guilt coil inside her. "I never wanted to sabotage your business, but you and I both know the girls deserve acknowledgement." He nodded, fiddling with the edge of the menu. "Yes, and I'm prepared to give it. But the question is how. If we go public too suddenly, The paparazzi will descend on the twins like vultures. They'll be hounded at school, at home, everywhere. Tears threatened Michelle's composure. I'm already worried about that. My friend can't hide them forever. She paused, a tremor in her voice. I need your help to keep them safe. Edward reached out, tentatively touching her hand. His tone softened. You have my word. I've asked my security detail to coordinate with yours. They're standing by to help relocate you and the girls to a quieter place, away from reporters. His expression hardened. But there are other issues at play. Someone inside my circle might be feeding the tabloids. This didn't come out of nowhere. Michelle's eyes widened. You think someone close to you leaked the story? He exhaled, looking older than usual. Yes, and that's just one part of it. Some of my board members are twisting this into a reason to question my leadership. It's all happening too fast and we don't know who's pulling the strings. Suddenly, a phone buzzed on the table. Edward picked it up, scanning the screen. A flash of anger cut across his features. He tapped a few times, then swore under his breath. It's another article, this time claiming you're seeking millions in child support. Michelle's cheeks flamed. That's obviously not true. I didn't even ask for anything except recognition. He set the phone down, eyes dark. I know, but the public loves a scandal. They'll print whatever sells. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Finally, Edward stood, pacing a few steps around the table, tension radiating off him in waves. They're trying to destroy both our lives and our children's future. We have to act now. The first hint that something bigger was going on came early the next morning. Michelle woke to her phone buzzing, the screen flashing Edward's name. Her heart lurched. She doubted any call this early brought good news. She fumbled for her phone, brushing away the haze of half-sleep. Michelle? Edward said, voice hushed and urgent. We need to meet. It can't wait. She heard a rustling sound, like he was already pacing somewhere. What happened? There's been a development. I'll send a driver for you in 30 minutes, all right? He asked, not waiting for a real answer before muttering a rushed goodbye. Michelle dressed quickly, forcing down a cup of coffee that burned her tongue. The city beyond her window stirred to life, sunlight catching on skyscrapers. She couldn't help but recall how simple life was before she confronted Edward on that jet, before paparazzi and shady threats. Every day since then felt like a climb uphill in an unrelenting storm. True to his word, a dark sedan arrived on schedule, its tinted windows giving Michelle a taste of the anonymity she sorely needed. She slipped into the back seat, greeting the driver with a brief nod, then spent the ride fiddling with her phone, answering texts from friends worried about rumors swirling online. One mentioned sightings of reporters outside the building where she once lived. Another said a talk show host had invited her to appear and share her side of the story. Michelle shut her eyes, wishing she could block out the world. The car pulled into an underground parking garage beneath an unmarked office building. A private elevator brought her to a high floor where she found Edward pacing a stark hallway. Fluorescent lights reflected off marble floors. He looked up as soon as he heard footsteps, tension carving lines in his face. This way, he said, leading her to a room that felt more secure than welcoming. The curtains were drawn, and a single desk occupied the center, strewn with papers and a laptop. A plainclothes security guard hovered in the background, watchful yet silent. Edward gestured for her to sit. I've been digging into the leak. My accountants flagged unusual financial transactions, money moving from certain corporate accounts to contacts that supply tabloid stories. Michelle felt her pulse jump. So someone you trust is paying the press? He nodded grimly. Could be a relative or a high-ranking executive. I've called an emergency board meeting for later today, so I can confront everyone in person. But until I get proof, I can't accuse anyone outright. She sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. This is insane. All because someone wants to undermine your position? I suspect so, he said. They want me distracted, maybe even removed as CEO. Our biggest merger in years is on the line, and if enough board members lose faith in my leadership, they'll force me out. You and the twins are an easy angle to exploit. His tone carried a mix of bitterness and regret. But we can't let them use our children like pawns. Michelle nodded. I understand. She paused, voice quivering. You know my biggest fear is that all this attention will affect the girls. They're old enough to ask questions if cameras start following them to school. She recalled how last night her friend sent pictures of what looked like an unmarked van idling across the street from the house. Whether it held reporters or worse, Michelle didn't know, but the chill that slithered down her spine was unmistakable. I won't let them be in danger, Edward said firmly. Or you either. A knock at the door interrupted them, and a bespectacled accountant entered, offering a sheaf of papers with a polite bow of his head. This is the latest data, he murmured. Transfers from an internal account to a shell entity. The timing lines up with each tabloid story. It's all there, if you look carefully. Edward thanked him, skimming the pages with intense focus. Michelle leaned forward to read over his shoulder. The figures were dizzying, thousands of dollars here, tens of thousands there. Clearly not the kind of petty sum an outsider would get their hands on easily. They barely had time to process the implications before Edward's phone buzzed. He answered it in hushed tones, brow creasing. The board meeting is still on, he said after hanging up, but some members are already questioning if I'll step aside to handle this family fiasco. They're hinting it's in the best interest of the company. Michelle's cheeks burned with anger. They make it sound like your kids are a nuisance instead of your responsibility. It's disgusting. Edward looked grateful for her support. It's not all of them, he said quietly. Some want to stand by me, but the voices demanding my resignation are growing louder. They think it'll clean up the scandal. Michelle took a steadying breath. So, what's our plan? He exhaled. I'll go to the board meeting, show them these suspicious financial trails. If I can prove sabotage, maybe I can weaken whatever hold these conspirators have. Her phone vibrated on the desk, an incoming video call from home. She bit her lip, hesitating. It's the girls, she said softly, pressing accept. Two bright faces appeared on the screen, the camera wiggling as little hands struggled to hold it steady. Michelle's heart melted. She tried to keep her tone light, ignoring Edward's presence. Hey, my loves! Mama, why are people outside with cameras? One of them asked, eyes wide. We can't play in the yard. Michelle's stomach clenched. They're just curious about something, honey. But don't worry, I'm making sure you're safe. Edward shifted closer, looking at the screen with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. He raised a hand in a small wave. The girls gave him a curious glance. Michelle's friend intervened off-camera, gently steering them away, likely sensing how emotional Michelle was becoming. The call ended a moment later. Michelle wiped at her cheek, blinking back tears. They deserve a normal childhood, Edward said softly, voice unsteady. Michelle nodded, her throat tight. She shoved her phone into her pocket. The door opened again, revealing a face Michelle recognized from the jet, a senior executive who had seemed sympathetic that night. He cast a wary glance at Edward before speaking. I heard you're gathering intel about who leaked details to the tabloids, he said. If it helps, I know someone on the board who's been having hush-hush meetings with a certain media contact. Nothing concrete, but rumors swirl. Edward stood taller, tension coiling in his shoulders. Names? The executive hesitated. I'd rather share it privately. Let's just say, it's someone close to you. Closer than you might think. After a moment, he scribbled a note on a piece of paper, handed it to Edward and left, shutting the door behind him. Edward's jaw tightened as he read what was written. He slipped the note into his pocket. So it's true, he muttered, voice heavy with betrayal. Someone I've trusted for years might be behind all this. Michelle's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a news alert. Paparazzi break into private parking garage, searching for secret heirs. She felt bile rise in her throat. They'll do anything for a photo, she said bitterly. What if they follow me here, or corner the kids at school? Worry made her pace the room. I can't live like this. Edward set his hand on her shoulder, his grip steady. We'll find a solution. I've ordered extra security around your friend's place, just to be safe. His voice turned determined. Whoever is behind this, I won't let them hurt you or the twins. Still, the atmosphere bristled with tension, as if an unseen clock counted down. They gathered their notes and headed for the elevator, stepping out into a sidewalk crowded with office workers on lunch break. Across the street, a photographer pointed a camera in their direction. Michelle's stomach knotted, but she kept her head high, allowing Edward's bodyguard to guide them both to a waiting car. Edward's phone rang again as the driver pulled away. Michelle could hear muffled shouting from the other end. After a few terse replies, Edward hung up, pressing a hand to his forehead. Apparently there's been suspicious activity near your old apartment complex. Someone asking neighbors about you and the children. A cold dread settled over her. Asking neighbors? That's invasive. Do you think it's just reporters? His face was grim. I'm not so sure anymore. If someone is paying tabloids, they might pay others to dig up whatever dirt they can. Could be a private investigator or someone trying to intimidate you. Michelle's heart pounded. She stared out the car window at the passing city. Families strolled on sidewalks, blissfully unaware of the turmoil swirling around them. She imagined her own daughters playing in a park without fear, the way they used to before all this exploded. We have to protect them, she said, voice raw. I can handle my own fear, but they're just kids. Edward nodded. I'll do everything in my power. For now, stay with the security team I've assigned. I'll handle the board meeting and continue investigating. He paused, then added, We won't let them win, Michelle. She looked at him, seeing both the man who once vanished from her life and the father determined to make amends. Despite everything, the flicker of hope in his eyes steadied her. They arrived back at her hotel. Edward walked her to her floor, ensuring nobody suspicious lingered in the hallway. He gently squeezed her arm before leaving. Stay safe, he whispered. Then the elevator doors slid shut, whisking him away. Michelle entered her suite to find the lights dim and silence pressing down. She shut the door behind her, wishing she could shut out the entire world just as easily. Her gaze fell on a small envelope that lay on the floor, slipped beneath the door. Heart thudding, she bent to pick it up. Unmarked. She tore it open, scanning the words inside. Walk away from this, or watch everything crumble. Michelle read the threatening note twice over, her pulse hammering. The words on the page, walk away from this, or watch everything crumble, had been slipped under her hotel room door like a silent warning. She swallowed hard, glancing at the clock on the bedside table. The walls seemed to close in, every shadow more menacing than before. She wondered if someone was lurking in the hallway, waiting to see how she'd react. Before her mind spun out of control, she grabbed her phone and called Edward. He picked up on the second ring, his voice low and urgent. When she described the note, he fell silent. She pictured him standing in some high-rise office, shoulders tight with anger. Finally, he spoke. I'm coming over, he said. Stay put and don't open that door for anyone. Within the hour, Edward arrived, escorted by two of his plainclothes security staff who discreetly stationed themselves by the elevator. He stepped inside her suite and gently shut the door behind him. The tension in his face was palpable. He held the note, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Enough is enough, he said, voice strained. They're not just harassing you, they're threatening you. We have to fight back. Michelle sank onto the sofa, rubbing the tightness at her temples. I thought we already were, she said, bitterness creeping into her tone. but it seems every step we take, the saboteur strikes back harder. Edward crossed the room and knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. I won't let this person scare you off, or keep me from my daughters. We'll do whatever it takes to protect what's ours. His voice was soft, but it carried steel beneath each word. She nodded, feeling a surge of relief that, at least, she wasn't battling this monster alone. He retrieved his phone, flicking through messages. I've already arranged more security around your friend's house, he said, and around the school the twins attend too. Discreet, but competent. They'll be safe. A hint of tenderness tinged his eyes. It's time I see them properly, Michelle. She swallowed. Since all this chaos began, they'd spoken of him meeting the twins, but the moment kept getting derailed by scandal and sabotage. Now, with a fresh threat looming, it seemed both urgent and daunting. They've seen pictures of you, she said quietly. They know you as my friend. The word felt inadequate for what he truly was. They're curious. Edward nodded, his expression resolute. Then let's not wait any longer. 2 nights later, under the hush of twilight, Edward and Michelle slipped into a quiet suburban neighborhood in a car with tinted windows. The street was lined with modest houses and neatly trimmed lawns, worlds away from Edward's polished skyscrapers. Michelle's friend greeted them at the front door, a relieved smile on her face, and ushered them inside. The twins were in the living room, perched on a sofa that was a bit too large for their small frames. Soft lamplight revealed their bright eyes widening at the sight of Edward. One of them, Lily, shifted closer to her sister, as if seeking reassurance. Michelle's heart thudded. She knelt beside them, running a gentle hand over their hair. Girls, she said, her voice warm but trembling a bit. This is the special friend I told you about. Edward stepped forward, nerves etched into his normally composed features. He knelt too, so he was at eye level. Hello, he said softly, offering a smile. I've heard so much about you. For a moment the twins studied him. Finally, Lily spoke, voice faint. Why do you look like me and my sister? Her question was innocent, but the weight of it tore at Michelle's heart. Edward pressed his lips together, glancing at Michelle. They'd agreed not to reveal everything just yet, to let the girls adjust gradually. Sometimes people just look alike, he managed, not wanting to lie but unsure how else to respond. You two have the most beautiful smiles. They spent the next hour coloring and flipping through picture books. Edward asked them about their favorite TV shows, their favorite colors, the kind of simple, curious questions any adult might ask a child, but each answer was precious. Michelle watched from the side, arms folded tight around her as warmth and sorrow tangled within her. Her daughters deserved a father, yet it angered her that this moment of normalcy had to be so secret, a stolen pocket of calm in the midst of a swirling scandal. Eventually, both girls grew drowsy, and Michelle's friend tucked them in upstairs. Edward remained in the living room, exhaling as he sank onto the couch. The soft lamplight illuminated the raw emotion in his eyes. I can't believe how much time I've missed, he whispered. They're amazing. Michelle sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. You'll have more moments with them, she said, trying to keep her tone steady. But first, we have to unmask whoever keeps attacking us. He nodded, composure returning. I've hired a private investigator, he said. He's tracking bank records and phone logs, anything that might show who in my circle is funneling information to the tabloids. We're getting close. The next morning, Edward faced another tense board meeting at Anderson Enterprises. Whispers circulated the corridors. Half the directors believed he was being framed, while the other half thought he was endangering the company's reputation. As he walked into the glass-walled conference room, Michelle entered behind him, chin raised, determined to stand by his side. Silence fell. Men and women in tailored suits eyed them with various mixes of suspicion and support. One of Edward's relatives, who'd been friendly before, now looked incensed. She rose from her chair, voice sharpened by frustration. "Edward, is this really the time to bring outsiders into our corporate matters?" Michelle bristled at the word outsider. She stepped forward before Edward could speak. "I'm not an outsider," she said calmly, though her stomach churned. "I represent something you all seem eager to ignore. Edward's children. They are part of his family, and they deserve recognition and protection, not shame and cover-ups." A few of the board members exchanged awkward looks. One older director cleared his throat, plainly uneasy but not altogether opposed. Another crossed his arms, a visible scowl deepening the lines of his face. Tension roiled in the room. Edward cleared his throat, a steely resolve shining in his eyes. "We call ourselves a family company, built on values. It's time we prove it's not just a slogan. Whether you consider them illegitimate heirs or not, those twins are my daughters. I won't abandon them." He set a folder on the table. "I also have evidence of sabotage, records of money transfers that coincide with leaked stories. We haven't uncovered the person's name yet, but it's enough to start an internal audit. If you truly value the Anderson name, you'll help me root out the real threat." A murmur of voices filled the room. Some directors glanced at each other, clearly unsettled by the mention of a conspiracy. One woman nodded in agreement. Others hardened their stances, refusing to meet Edward's eyes. The relative who had spoken earlier looked daggers at Michelle. Outside the conference room, a phone buzzed in the hallway. One of Edward's trusted aides hurried in, whispering something in his ear. Edward's gaze darkened. "Excuse me," he said, stepping out. Michelle followed, her gut churning with fresh anxiety. The aide handed Edward a series of blurry photographs. Michelle peered over his shoulder and recognized a familiar figure, a close member of Edward's extended family, stepping out of a taxi directly in front of a known gossip rag's headquarters. "It's worse than we suspected," Edward said, voice taut. "Look, she's delivering something, an envelope maybe." He flipped through the images, scanning every detail. "I can't believe she'd do this." Michelle put a hand on his arm. "We'll confront her," she said. "But be careful. There might be others involved." Later that afternoon, Michelle found herself in a near-empty corridor, heart pounding. She had ventured out of the boardroom to take a breather, the tension suffocating. Suddenly, movement at the end of the hallway caught her eye. Two figures hovered near the elevator doors, each glancing her way. When she took a cautious step toward them, they abruptly turned and rushed into the stairwell, leaving her unsettled. It was yet another reminder that prying eyes and silent watchers lurked around every corner. Even so, she steeled her nerves and returned to Edward's side. That evening, they carved out a small window of time to visit the twins again. This time, Edward came armed with books to read aloud, and the girls settled around him, listening wide-eyed. Michelle watched from across the room, a subtle ache in her chest. She'd longed for this father-daughter connection, yet it also underscored all they'd lost in the years gone by. Once the girls were asleep, Michelle and Edward retreated downstairs, speaking in hushed tones about the sabotage and the shifting alliances at Anderson Enterprises. They were interrupted by one of Edward's employees calling to confess that he'd been coerced, blackmailed into leaking harmless tidbits that someone else spun into sensational headlines. The employee sounded terrified. I'm so sorry. I didn't think it would escalate like this," the man said in a trembling voice. "It's all right," Edward reassured him, though his own anger blazed. "Just tell me everything you know. We'll protect you." Michelle exchanged a determined look with Edward. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. By the time they left the house, the street lamps had flickered on. The hush of night enveloped them. Edward paused beneath the faint glow of a nearby lamp. "We've been through so much in such a short time," he murmured, turning toward Michelle. "I'm sorry for all the hurt." She met his eyes, trying to hide the raw emotions swirling inside her. "We'll get past this," she said softly. "And the girls, they already adore you." He looked down, a faint, grateful smile touching his lips. I adore them too. A beat passed, the night air cool against their faces, carrying a quiet promise of hope. Then Michelle's phone buzzed. She fished it out, heart pounding as a frantic message appeared on the screen. It's much worse than we thought. Meet me now, alone. Michelle's heart hammered as she read and reread the urgent text. It's much worse than we thought. Meet me now, alone. She felt the skin at the back of her neck prickle. Without overthinking, she dialed the number of the sender, an unfamiliar contact she assumed belonged to the frightened employee who had confessed to leaking small bits of information. No answer. Panic threaded through her thoughts, but she told herself to stay calm. She typed a quick reply. Where do I go? Moments later, a single word came back. Westwood. She glanced at Edward, who stood under the lamppost, searching her face with quiet concern. The children slept inside, unaware of the storm raging around them. Michelle's phone buzzed again, cutting through the still night. The message read, Parking garage, 3rd level, far corner. Alone. She hesitated, biting her lip. I have to follow this lead, she said, meeting Edward's worried gaze. Someone's about to hand me proof or tell me something that might blow this wide open. Edward reached out to steady her trembling hand. You can't go alone. It's too dangerous. She shook her head, heart twisting with indecision. They insisted. Alone. They might run if they see you or any of your security. Besides, if we don't act, we'll never unmask who's doing this. Edward's grip tightened. Then let me station my guard at a distance, he said. I won't let you walk into a trap. She nodded, only slightly reassured. Time felt pressing. Within minutes, they'd arranged for one of Edward's security men to follow in a separate car, staying out of sight. Michelle slid into her vehicle and drove, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Buildings blurred into one another, the city lights seeming colder than ever before. She wondered which faces in Edward's orbit had orchestrated the chaos now threatening both his company and their children. Finally, she turned onto a dimly lit street in Westwood, pulling into a concrete parking structure. At this hour, it was almost deserted, the fluorescent lights casting eerie, flickering shadows against bare walls. She found the 3rd level and parked in a far corner, leaving the engine idling for a moment as she scanned her surroundings. One lonely sedan stood off to the side, but she couldn't see anyone moving inside. Gathering her courage, she stepped out. Footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Her heart pounded, each breath too loud in her own ears. Hello? She called softly, voice reverberating against the concrete pillars. No answer. She tried to keep her thoughts steady, remembering Edward's security guard was somewhere outside. A car door creaked open from the sedan. A figure stepped out, a nervous-looking man in a rumpled suit. He kept glancing around as though expecting they were being watched. Michelle recognized him as the anxious employee who had phoned Edward days earlier. He offered her a tense nod, eyes darting across the empty lot. You came, he whispered, his voice echoing. I'm sorry for dragging you here, but there's no other way. Michelle drew closer. What's going on? She asked, forcing her tone to be gentle despite the adrenaline churning inside her. Why did you say it's worse? He held out a flash drive, hand trembling. You need to show Edward this, he said. I managed to download copies of emails and documents, some from inside the company, some from the family's legal team. They're planning to oust him, yes, but they also want to drag your name through the mud. They're building a legal case to discredit your children's claim, painting you as a fraud. Michelle's stomach dropped. They would actually try to deny the twins' paternity? She pictured how that would affect the girls, how humiliating it would be for them. Her voice shook. Who's behind it? He glanced over his shoulder again. All roads lead back to one of Edward's own relatives. It's... A sudden crash of metal from the other side of the parking garage made them both jump. The man's eyes widened with pure alarm. We're not alone, he hissed. Michelle tucked the flash drive into her pocket. "Come with me," she urged. "We'll bring this to Edward tonight." He shook his head, fear making him reel back. "No. If they know I leaked documents, I'm done. Just promise me you'll protect me once this all comes out." He darted toward his sedan. "Take care," he said, slamming the door shut. The engine revved, and the car sped off, tires screeching. Michelle clutched the flash drive, scanning the dark corners for movement. She thought she saw a figure slip behind a pillar, but before she could confirm it, her phone chimed. A message from Edward's guard. "Car waiting at exit. Hurry." She wasted no time. She hurried back to her car, started the engine, and drove out of the parking structure. Her heart didn't stop pounding until she saw the unobtrusive SUV following her at a safe distance. Back at Edward's building, she bypassed the lobby's polished marble floors and took a private elevator up to a top-floor suite. Edward had said he'd be waiting, and sure enough, the moment the doors slid open, he hurried forward, eyes flicking from her face to the flash drive clutched in her hand. She collapsed onto a couch, breath coming in heavy gasps. He grabbed her shoulders gently. "Are you okay?" he asked, worry lacing his words. She nodded, swallowing back panic. "I got it," she said, holding out the small flash drive. "He said it's emails, documents, proof of who's trying to kick you out and ruin me." Edward looked from the device to her face, gratitude and anger mingling in his expression. "This might give us the upper hand." He guided her to a sleek wooden desk near a floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the city glowed, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these walls. They plugged the drive into a laptop, scanning the first few files. Michelle's pulse quickened at the words that jumped off the screen, references to ousting Edward, illegitimate heirs, and strategies to manipulate press coverage. "It's all here," she whispered, leaning over his shoulder as he clicked through the folders. "They've been coordinating with tabloids for months." Edward's face darkened. "So this is bigger than just one rogue leak. It's a whole operation." At that moment, a call came through from one of Edward's most trusted board allies. He picked up on speaker so Michelle could listen. The ally spoke in a rushed tone. "Edward, there's an emergency board meeting happening first thing tomorrow. It seems your relative, I think you know which one, has called for a vote of no confidence. They're claiming your personal scandal puts the entire enterprise at risk. If the motion passes, you'll be forced out." Michelle's breath caught. Edward set his jaw. "They can't do that," he growled. "I'll be there with proof." "Whatever you have, make it count," the ally warned. "They're playing dirty, and they've got supporters." By the time the call ended, Michelle's hands were shaking. "They're really trying to push you out as CEO so they can, what? Control the company themselves and bury us in the process?" That's exactly it. Edward inserted a thumb drive into the laptop, copying the files from the flash drive. "We'll confront them with these documents, show how they manufactured the scandal. Even if it's one or two key players behind this, enough evidence will turn the board in my favor." Michelle exhaled shakily, looking up at him. "We can't let them bury the truth." Early the next morning, Edward strode into the boardroom, Michelle at his side. The conference table was crowded with steely-eyed directors, some looking exhausted, others smug. At the head of the table stood Edward's relative, the same one who had thrown so many barbs at Michelle. Today she wore a calm mask, but her eyes glinted with hidden triumph. She cleared her throat. "Edward, thank you for joining us. We have urgent matters to discuss about the direction of Anderson Enterprises. Given your recent distractions, many of us believe you've compromised this company's stability." Edward stood taller, revealing no hint of intimidation. "Recent distractions? You mean the sabotage orchestrated by someone in this very room?" He glanced around, letting the accusation hang in the air. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Michelle's heart hammered as Edward opened his laptop and projected the incriminating emails, bank statements, and phone logs. Gasps erupted. A few board members shot astonished glares at one another. The relative's confident veneer cracked. Her eyes darted toward the door, a telltale flicker of panic crossing her face. "Care to explain these?" Edward asked icily, gesturing to a thread of emails detailing payments to a tabloid in exchange for coverage of secret heirs and illegitimate children. The body text even included bullet points on how to present Michelle as a schemer. The relative fumbled for words, face flushing. "This is twisted out of context," she hissed, though everyone could see the damning evidence plainly. "I was just trying to protect the company from scandal." "That's an interesting way to protect it," Michelle cut in, voice trembling with anger. "By lying about me and my children, tarnishing your own family name." Another director voiced shock at the betrayal. Still others demanded an explanation, raising voices as they realized how close they'd come to removing Edward based on false claims. The relative stumbled through a half-hearted defense, but the tide had turned. Fury replaced confusion in the boardroom now that they knew the sabotage originated within their ranks. Edward snapped the laptop shut. "I'm filing for an internal investigation. Until it's complete, you have no authority to call for any vote on my leadership." He cast a final, piercing look at the relative who'd nearly cost him his children's future. "I hope you're ready to face the consequences." After the dramatic meeting, Michelle and Edward left the boardroom together. In the corridor, he let out a shaky breath, relief mingled with lingering tension. "We did it," he said, turning to her with a small, hopeful smile. Michelle nodded, exhaustion washing over her. "Now at least the truth is out. They won't be able to keep harassing us with phony scandals." Edward took her hand. "They'll try something worse now. We have to protect our family at any cost." Edward's words still echoed in Michelle's mind as the day wore on. "They'll try something worse now. We have to protect our family at any cost." She felt that warning like a low buzz under her skin, a hum of anxiety that wouldn't let her rest. It had been a harrowing morning in the boardroom, unmasking a saboteur within Edward's own family circle. But while one threat had been identified, she sensed that their enemies weren't done. Late that evening, she found herself curled up in an armchair in Edward's penthouse office, the city lights painting geometric shapes across the hardwood floor. Edward paced in front of the massive windows, phone in hand, orchestrating more security for the twins' school and finalizing strategies with a legal team. Michelle noticed the lines of strain around his eyes, a tension in his voice that never used to be there. He ended the call and turned to her. "I've just been informed that more defamatory stories are about to be published," he said, voice hushed. "Things about you, me, the twins, complete lies." She exhaled slowly, recalling how, just a few weeks ago, she and the girls lived a quiet life. Now they were the center of a growing storm. "They don't care if it's true," she replied, rubbing her temples. "They only want clicks and a scandal sells." Edward dropped into the chair opposite hers. "I can't let them keep dragging you through the mud. This has gone on too long." His tone was more than frustrated. It was protective. Her phone buzzed on the side table. She lifted it to read a message from a friend. "I saw the news about your secret gold-digging past. I know it's garbage, but are you okay?" Michelle felt her stomach twist. Another wave of half-baked gossip had clearly hit the feeds. With a shaky sigh, she typed back a quick reassurance. Then she locked her phone and placed it face down, as though doing so could somehow keep the slander at bay. Edward's phone rang next, and he answered it with a curt greeting. Michelle could hear muffled voices. When he ended the call, he shook his head. "They're going after the merger now," he said grimly. "Rumors about our instability have spooked a major partner. If we lose them, the entire deal could collapse." Michelle felt her heart sink. She remembered how critical that merger was to Edward's plans, a project that could shape the company's future for years. "Is there any chance we can salvage it?" she asked. He frowned. "I have a private meeting with top investors tomorrow. They're on the fence, worried about bad publicity, worried about sabotage from within. We need to convince them the company's stable. Otherwise, they'll pull out." Michelle looked at him, seeing the weight he carried. First, the threat to his family, now his life's work under siege. "If I can help, I will," she offered, though the idea of facing a room full of skeptical investors rattled her. "We could speak together, show them we're not letting this scandal tear everything apart." Edward reached for her hand across the space between their chairs. "That might be exactly what we need," he admitted. "They have to see we're united, that this conspiracy doesn't define us." She let out a shaky breath. "Then let's do it." The following afternoon, Michelle found herself standing in front of a polished boardroom table, yet again, but this time it was filled not with directors but with potential investors whose gazes pinned her with cool calculation. She smoothed out the creases of her dress, forcing her shoulders back and chin up. Beside her, Edward cut a commanding figure, though she could sense the tension in how he clasped his hands behind his back. One older gentleman cleared his throat, speaking with a heavy accent. "Mr. Anderson, I'm aware you're battling both internal and external threats. Quite frankly, our consortium does not invest unless we have total confidence." Edward nodded respectfully. "I understand your concerns, but rest assured, the person behind the sabotage has been exposed and we're taking legal action. The family scandal is nothing more than an orchestrated attempt to ruin my reputation." The man glanced at Michelle. "And who is this young woman to you exactly? The press calls her many names." A hush fell across the table. Michelle felt a flush crawling up her neck, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm the mother of Edward's children," she said, looking the man in the eye. "I've never wanted to sabotage his business. My only goal is to ensure our daughters have the father they deserve. There's no malice, no gold-digging scheme. I wish these rumors were as fictitious as they sound to you." She saw flickers of empathy in a few of the gathered faces. Others remained stoic, unconvinced. Edward stepped in, voice calm and assured. "You know me by my track record, my business ethics, my acquisitions, and the way I've steered this company to success. None of that changes because I discovered I have daughters. The scandal is not ours. It's the creation of someone in my orbit who wanted to destabilize Anderson Enterprises. And to them, that meant attacking my family." One investor, a woman with a stern expression softened by a kind undertone, spoke up. "And have you confirmed who's behind these attacks?" she asked. Edward paused, exchanging a glance with Michelle. "We have," he said. "The investigation is ongoing, but the evidence points to a family member who, in collusion with tabloid sources, tried to force me out." Murmurs spread around the table. Another investor asked, "So your position is secure?" "That's what we're here to guarantee," Edward said firmly, "and I invite you to look at the data on my company's stability. Our finances remain strong, our growth projections are intact. This sabotage is a short-term hurdle, nothing more." He passed around a folder of reports while Michelle stood quietly, grateful she'd found the courage to speak. She prayed it was enough to dispel the swirling rumors. The investors took turns flipping through the documents, some nodding thoughtfully. When the meeting ended, a few approached Edward and Michelle with polite nods and a semblance of warmth. "We'll consider your words carefully," one of them said. "Thank you for clarifying." A faint smile touched Edward's lips. "Thank you for hearing us out." The moment they stepped into the corridor, Michelle pressed a hand to her chest, exhaling shakily. "I never realized how draining these negotiations can be," she admitted. Edward wrapped an arm around her shoulders, gently guiding her past rows of tinted glass offices. "You did great," he reassured, though his phone buzzed in his pocket before he could say more. He answered swiftly, face darkening at whatever he heard. "Keep me posted," he muttered, hanging up. She didn't need to ask. His expression said it all. The sabotage continued. They strode quickly through the building's lobby, ignoring curious stares. Outside, cameras clicked. More paparazzi had gathered, shouting questions as Edward's car pulled up. Security cleared a path, and Michelle and Edward slid into the back seat, the doors shutting on a barrage of flashbulbs. Safely inside, Michelle turned toward Edward, dread pooling in her stomach. "This never ends," she whispered. "Every day, more rumors, more cameras." He reached for her hand. "We're close to turning the tide," he said quietly. "The board is mostly on our side now, and the investors seemed open. But the saboteur isn't done. They know their time is running out." She stared out at the city streets, remembering a simpler life. Then, out of nowhere, her phone lit with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered in a wary tone. "Hello?" The voice that answered was distorted but urgent. "I have information that can help you end this smear campaign. Proof of bigger plans at play. Meet me at the old printing warehouse on Watson Street an hour from now." Her breath caught. "Who is this?" "Come alone," the voice repeated. Then the line went dead. Michelle dropped her phone to her lap, a cold sweat beading on her brow. That was someone offering more evidence, another tip-off possibly. They said to come alone. Edward shook his head emphatically. "Absolutely not. It could be a trap. We'll send the investigator, or I'll come with you." Michelle recalled how she'd nearly been cornered before. She hated the idea of walking into potential danger. But if this tip really held the final piece to expose the saboteur's entire operation, she wasn't sure they could ignore it. "Let's be smart about it," she said. "We'll go together. Low profile, minimal security. If it's real, it might give us the last push we need to stop all these lies." Edward's phone buzzed again, a text from his legal team. "We've scheduled a press conference for this evening to address the scandal. You'll need to make a statement." He rubbed his temples. "They think we should confront the public head-on, clarify everything we can." Michelle nodded, her stomach twisting. "It never stops," she murmured. Yet a resolute calm crept over her. "If going public with the truth can shield our daughters from the next wave of cruelty, then let's do it. No more half measures." That evening, the press conference took place in a sprawling hotel ballroom. Rows of chairs faced a raised platform where a podium waited under bright stage lights. Journalists and photographers crowded in, lenses pointed like rifles, ready to capture every flicker of emotion. Michelle stood behind Edward, heart thrumming with nerves. He approached the microphone, scanning the sea of expectant faces. Cameras flashed, questions flew. He raised a hand, requesting silence. Slowly, the commotion settled. "I know many of you have questions about my personal life," he began, voice echoing. "Yes, I recently learned I'm the father of twin daughters. No, I did not willfully hide them. The scandal you've heard about was orchestrated by someone close to me, someone who hoped to leverage personal secrets to force me out of Anderson Enterprises. The allegations of fraud or deception against the mother of my children are false." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Michelle heard shutters clicking, half-formed questions hovering on journalists' lips. Edward pressed on. "This company, my company, won't be destroyed by deceit from within. I stand by my daughters, and I stand by Michelle Grant, who has raised them with love. We will be taking legal action against the parties responsible for leaking private information and slandering our family." Michelle's throat tightened as he spoke, but she refused to shrink back. She stepped forward, making her presence clear. "The only reason I'm here is for my children's sake," she said, voice trembling but strong enough to carry over the murmurs. "I never wanted a public spectacle, but this conspiracy forced us to defend ourselves. Edward and I want nothing more than peace for our daughters, away from the cameras, away from lies." Questions rained down. Who is behind the sabotage? What does this mean for Edward Anderson's leadership? They answered as carefully as they could, refusing to name names yet. The official investigation needed to confirm final details. More flashes, more rushed notations by reporters. Finally, Edward wound down. "That's all for now," he said. "Thank you." He ushered Michelle off the stage, ignoring journalists clamoring for more. They ducked behind a curtain, adrenaline crashing through them. The entire press conference had lasted mere minutes, but it felt like a battle waged under hot lights. They stepped into a smaller side room, half dizzy from the intensity. "We did the right thing," Michelle whispered. "No more rumors, no more secrets. If we have to fight, at least it's out in the open now." Edward agreed with a nod. "Let's hope it turns the tide." Just then, his phone rang. Michelle caught the distressed look on his face before he picked up. "Yes?" A tense silence followed. Then his eyes flashed with panic. "When? How?" He hung up, every muscle in his body rigid. Michelle clutched his arm, heart pounding. "Edward, what is it?" He swallowed, voice unsteady. "Someone's breached the twins' security detail." Michelle felt her heart plummet the instant Edward uttered those words. "Someone's breached the twins' security detail." It was like the world dropped out from beneath her feet. The press conference's echoing applause still rang in her ears, but all of it faded into irrelevance. She gripped Edward's arm, searching his eyes for answers. He looked as pale as she felt. "Where are they?" Michelle asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. Edward was already dialing his head of security. "They were at your friend's house. The guard on duty just reported an intruder forced the back door, then took off when confronted." His words tumbled out in an urgent rush. "The girls are safe for now, but—" He didn't need to finish. Michelle was already moving, hurrying down a corridor that led to a waiting elevator, ignoring the startled employees who stepped aside. She heard Edward close behind, barking rapid instructions into his phone. She pressed the elevator button repeatedly, every second feeling like an eternity. When the doors slid open, they stepped in, faces drawn with fear. On the ride down, Edward arranged for immediate transport. "We can't let whoever did this get away," he said, jaw clenched. "If they've made it this far, they won't stop unless we stop them." Michelle swallowed. "I just want to see my daughters. Now." Outside, the car was already waiting, tires squealing as they pulled away from the curb. Streetlights blurred past in streaks of gold. Michelle's pulse matched the racing engine, her mind jumping to worst-case scenarios. She squeezed Edward's hand, drawing what comfort she could from his presence, but the tension in the car was suffocating. When they finally arrived at her friend's house, a swirl of activity filled the yard. Security personnel with flashlights combed the perimeter. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, uneasy about the commotion. Michelle jumped out of the car before it even stopped fully, sprinting up the driveway. Her friend met her at the door, eyes wide. "They're fine," she managed breathlessly. "Shaken, but fine. They're upstairs with a guard." Relief washed over Michelle, nearly buckling her knees. Edward rushed in after her, ascending the stairs two at a time. The twins sat huddled on the edge of the bed, both clinging to a teddy bear one of them had grabbed in the panic. As soon as they saw Michelle, they ran into her arms, sobbing. She held them close, feeling their small hearts hammering against her own. Edward knelt beside them, stroking their hair. "You're safe," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "No one will hurt you." One of the girls buried her face against his shoulder. "They broke the door," she said in a trembling voice. "We heard it." Michelle shot a questioning look at the guard standing in the corner. He murmured, "I tried to pursue the intruder, but they escaped. We have a partial description, though. We'll be tightening security again." Edward's phone rang, and he answered it with eyes still fixed on the children. A muffled conversation followed. Words like footprints, evidence, and police on the way drifted through the quiet. When he hung up, his expression had hardened into resolve. "We think we know who did this," he said, meeting Michelle's gaze, "and it might be connected to the same people who tried to sabotage the company." Her friend carefully escorted the twins downstairs, away from the broken door, while Edward and Michelle surveyed the damage. The splintered wood testified to a desperate, forceful entry. A few items had been strewn across the floor, evidence that the intruder had rummaged through drawers looking for something, or someone. Michelle's hands shook, imagining the terror her daughters must have felt. "They're targeting the girls directly now," she said bitterly, rummaging through the wreckage to see if anything was stolen. "It's no longer just about your company or your reputation. They're threatening our family face to face." Edward wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "I won't let them get away with this," he promised, "no matter what." Soon, police arrived, scanning for prints and questioning the frightened neighbors. Michelle's friend brought the twins over, and the officers gently asked if they saw anything. Both girls shook their heads, still too frightened to speak. Watching them try to be brave lit a spark of fury in Michelle's chest. She clenched her fists, thinking of how badly these conspirators had underestimated her resolve. One officer murmured that it might be best if the family didn't stay at this location anymore. "You should probably move somewhere more secure," he said, "at least until we catch whoever did this." Michelle and Edward exchanged a look, recalling the string of threats, the infiltration of private details. "We'll bring them to my estate," Edward said decisively, "where we can have full control of security." Michelle hesitated for half a beat, then nodded. At first, the idea of uprooting the girls again weighed on her, but the memory of them trembling in fear made it clear they needed the highest protection possible. Hours later, they arrived at Edward's sprawling property under the cover of darkness. A private security team flanked every entrance. Spotlights illuminated the tall gates and cameras scanned the perimeter. It felt daunting, like stepping into a fortress, yet Michelle couldn't deny the sense of relief knowing the twins were in a far safer place. Inside, a housekeeper showed them to a pair of cozy adjoining rooms prepared for the girls. Michelle marveled at the plush beds, the tasteful decorations. Edward watched quietly from the door as the girls peeked around, calmer now that they had each other. One of them gently touched a teddy bear perched on a nightstand, blinking in awe. Michelle stood behind them, arms folded. She flashed back to her life before the confrontation, never imagining she'd be in a billionaire's home, protecting her children from elaborate corporate schemes and vendettas. But here they were, forging a new reality. Edward ushered her aside, voice low. "I'm assigning a personal guard to stay outside their doors all night," he said, "and we'll check in regularly." She nodded, exhaustion and gratitude mingling. "Thank you." Later, once the girls were asleep, Michelle tiptoed downstairs, where Edward waited in a softly lit living room. He offered her a hot drink, then sank onto a sofa, shoulders finally sagging with fatigue. "I spoke to my investigators again," he said. "The final piece of evidence we needed is in hand. The relative behind all this is cornered, and now we have direct proof tying them to the intruder who broke in tonight." Michelle's grip tightened on the mug. "What do we do next?" He leaned forward. "We press charges, obviously," he said, "and we finalize the security around you and the girls. After that, I'll hold an emergency press briefing, not just to protect the company's merger, but to publicly condemn the actions of my own family member." She set her mug on the table and slid closer. "Edward, this will all blow up. It's going to be massive." He reached for her hand, his tone gentling. "I know. But it ends here. No more letting them terrorize us." She thought of the twins' delicate faces, the life they deserved. For the first time, hope flickered through her exhaustion. "And what then?" she asked softly. "When all this is over, what happens to us?" Edward's eyes shone with quiet determination. "I want to be part of their daily lives. Our daily lives," he corrected, warmth filling his voice. "I've spent too many years in the dark. You and I might have a lot to work out, but we'll figure it out together." Michelle blinked away tears, surprising even herself with how deeply she yearned for that. A life not overshadowed by scandal or separation, but by healing, normalcy, and maybe even love. They stayed like that for a while, simply drawing comfort from each other's presence. Eventually, the hush of the estate settled around them. Edward escorted her up the winding stairs, pausing in front of the door where the twins slept. He peeked in, just to ensure they were safe. Michelle watched his face soften as he saw them tucked snugly, breathing slow and even in peaceful slumber. He closed the door gently, turning to Michelle with an expression that spoke of both relief and resolve. "We'll fix this once and for all." Days later, news broke of a dramatic arrest. The relative at the center of the conspiracy was taken into custody following a police raid. The evidence was overwhelming. Payment records, messages plotting to destroy Edward's reputation, and even communications with the hired intruder. Even the most skeptical tabloids ran headlines that redeemed Edward as a father simply defending his children from treachery. Anderson Enterprises stabilized overnight, the threatened merger moving forward as investors breathed a collective sigh of relief. Michelle watched it unfold with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. By the end of that week, the city seemed calmer. No reporters hounded Michelle's doorstep. No ominous vans idled outside the twins' school. Word spread that Edward Anderson had acknowledged paternity in full, and that the rumored scandal had been orchestrated by a disgruntled family member. In time, the story became less about tabloid gossip and more about a family coming together against betrayal. At last, on a gently glowing evening, Michelle found herself standing on the sweeping lawn behind Edward's estate. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden stripes over the manicured grass. In the distance, the twins chased each other around a flower bed, giggling in that carefree way she hadn't heard for what felt like forever. Edward, standing nearby, watched them with a slow, contented smile. For once, Michelle could breathe. The nights of fear, the non-stop phone alerts, the urgent calls with lawyers, they all receded into memory, replaced by the tranquil hush of dusk settling over their new reality. She realized with a soft pang of wonder that they'd made it through. Edward called the girls over and scooped them into his arms. They squealed with joy as he spun them in a slow circle. Michelle moved closer, drawn by the simple warmth of the moment. The children looked at her, eyes shining, and a wave of love surged in her chest. Sunset turned the sky a vivid mixture of pink and orange. Edward held both daughters easily, one on each hip, then reached out a hand to Michelle. As she joined him, he gazed at her with quiet emotion etched in his face. "This is just the beginning of everything we're meant to be." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.